Hello, my name is Dr. Nick Galli, and I'm the mental performance coach for U.S. speed skating, both short and long track national teams. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about motivation. And the format will be, I'm just going to give you 3 tips of things that you might do to enhance your motivation or your drive to improve. Tip number 1, this is a really important one. You need to know why you're skating or why you're competing. So this is different than what you do. This is different than how you do it. So you know what you do. You compete. You compete in the sport of speed skating. You know how you do it. So this is sort of the nuts and the bolts of your training. But do you know why you do it? And hopefully that reason has to do with you and not with so much with other people or why they think you should do it. So to get the most out of your ability, you need to know why you're doing it, and hopefully that reason relates to your love for doing it. That's the first tip. The second tip, and this can be a really hard one in competitive sport, is to learn to embrace what we call intrapersonal improvement in addition to inter. And what we mean by intra is just simply self-improvement. And you can see here by this graph, this idea that, over time, hopefully with good training and preparation, we get better. And eventually that will lead to success versus others. But before we can have success versus others, we have to have personal success and personal improvement. Even though that's not always recognized, to stay motivated, you need to recognize your own personal improvement. Sometimes that's through journaling or graphing of improvements, or even just talking to your coach. The more that people can embrace their own improvement, the more motivated they'll be. Tip number 3, and maybe you've heard of this one. It's a pretty popular one on the internet right now, and that's having the right mindset about success and failure. So Carol Dweck, who's a famous psychologist and wrote a book called Mindset, talks about how as human beings, we tend to either be more growth oriented and have a growth mindset or have a fixed mindset. People who are growth oriented see their ability as something that can change. And when they fail, they try and figure out what they can do about it to be better next time. People with a fixed mindset identify with their failures. So when they fail, they see their failures as who they are rather than how can I get better. And you can just see by reading some of the quotes here, the big difference between the growth and the fixed mindset. Really hard to be successful in sport with a fixed mindset. I'm either good or bad. Really, it's about self-improvement, like I just talked about there. So the more that you can work on having a growth mindset, especially when you fail, the more motivated you're going to tend to be. So in summary, to keep optimally motivated, you need to find out your why. You need to recognize your own personal improvement, and you need to have the right mindset. Hi, this is Nick Galli again, mental performance coach for US Speed Skating. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about emotional control. This is a really important aspect of being a performer because if you can't control your emotions, it's very difficult to control anything else about your performance or really any of your other psychological skills. So I want to give you a few tips on how you might go about controlling your emotions for optimal performance. The first tip, and this may seem kind of funny, is really about awareness. So some psychologists introduce this as that we all have our own internal stoplight, right? So a lot of us drive a car, so we know when we see red, it means we need to stop and wait. When we see yellow, we need to prepare to potentially stop. And when we see green, that means we just go. And some psychologists believe that our emotions are the same way. And if we can learn how to pay attention to where our stoplight is, we might be able to um, put ourselves in a better position to feel the right emotions. So if you check in with yourself and you're a go, good, just keep doing what you're doing. If you check in with yourself and you feel like maybe you're starting to get a little bit distracted or lose control a little bit, that means you need to just be cautious and take a minute and take action to make sure that you get into the green versus the red. And if you're in the red, that means you really need a timeout. Take a few minutes to yourself, collect your emotions, and then get back out there. Really, this is about awareness. If you're not aware of your emotions and where they are at any given point in time, then you're in a really difficult spot to be able to control them. So tip number one, pay attention to your internal emotional stoplight. Tip number two, another one that may seem a bit like common sense, but a lot of us struggle with it, especially when we're stressed, is to do what we call belly breathing. And I've got a diagram here. A lot of you have probably tried some breathing exercises or maybe done some yoga or meditation. Really, one of the best things you can do for yourself when you're starting to feel extra frustrated or anxious is to go to your breath. There's the physiological benefit of oxygenating your muscles and your brain. And then there's just the benefit of keeping you in the present moment and distracting you from your thoughts. So what I propose here in this diagram is that on the inhale for your belly breath, you focus on inhaling for a count of 6, holding for a count of 2, and exhaling nice and slowly for a count of 7. We want that exhale to be a little bit longer because the exhale is where we're really focused on getting rid of our negative thoughts and getting rid of our tension. So if we can practice doing this every day for a few minutes, it will become ingrained as our normal pattern of breathing when we start to feel stressed. And if you like, you can even try one now. I'll do the counting for you. So if you can sit, put your hands on your belly, and you're really going to focus on pushing out on that inhale. Okay, ready, go. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000. Hold for 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and now out. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000. Good. So hopefully you feel a little bit more relaxed. And the goal will be that over time in practice, in a moment of extreme stress or tension, you're able to just take one nice breath, even in your warm up, and get yourself back to where you need to be. Tip number 3 is to accept. And I've got some bullet points here, some rules for acceptance. Sometimes this goes against what we feel as athletes. We feel that we have to fight everything. When in many cases, we're better off just accepting what it is and working with what we have. I especially like the third bullet. Pain creates suffering only when you refuse to accept the pain. And this goes for physical pain, which we feel in sport, and emotional pain. If we can learn how to just accept it, not necessarily like it, but just recognize that this is how we feel right now, we can perform anyways, we're going to be in a much better place to keep our emotions from spiraling out of control. So to maintain emotional control, make sure you're checking in with your stoplight and increasing that awareness of your emotions. Make sure you're breathing and getting positive energy in and negative tension out using that 6-2-7 method, and then be accepting of your uncomfortable emotions. Hi, this is Dr. Nick Galli, mental performance coach for US Speed Skating again. And in this video, I want to talk to you something about one of the most important mental skills that you've probably heard coaches, parents say to you again and again, and that's focus. But rarely does anyone teach us how to focus and what to focus on. And I'm hoping that through a few tips here, you'll have a better idea of what we mean when we say the word focus. Probably the single most important mental skill as an athlete. My first tip, and again, this goes back to something that, pretty much anyone involved in sport would agree with, and that's before you can really focus, you need to create some degree of what we call automaticity of those basic skills so that you don't have to pay as much attention to the really fundamental aspects of what you do. I mean, a lot of you have probably heard the 10,000 hour rule and have an infograph that explains that here. But really it's about, automaticity is about really just building that capacity to allow you, certain aspects of your performance to be on autopilot so that you can attend or focus on more complex aspects of your sport or of your skating. So this means practicing a lot, of course, but also practicing deliberately and with a purpose. You've probably heard the term practice makes perfect, but actually it's perfect practice that makes perfect. It's not any old kind of practice. So create automaticity through deliberate practice. And oftentimes less quality practice will be more impactful than more lower quality practice. Tip number 2. Maybe you've heard this little phrase before, but I've found it useful with athletes that I work with, that if you can occasionally check in with yourself and ask yourself the question when, which stands for what's important now, it's a nice, quick, easy way to get you back on track when you're getting distracted or getting caught up in things that really aren't that important. So sometimes, athletes will put a sticker on them on their phone or on their bag or some kind of cue. And whenever they see that cue, they ask themselves the question, what's important now? And that might be something as simple as getting your gear on, or something as simple as having a pre-competition snack. Whatever it is, that's what's most important in that moment. And again, it may sound simple, but it's a little thing that we can do to make sure that our focus is on the most important thing, which is usually the thing that's happening in that moment. Win. And then my third tip, a lot of athletes are used to having routines or pre-performance plans, but you might also think about having an in-performance focus plan. And you might already have a version of this, but a focus plan can be really useful for a sport like yours that happens over time, and that's in some ways an endurance task. You can sort of break this task up into meaningful units and have these instructional thoughts or feelings that you want to have at each point in the race. Even when you're feeling your body's hurting, what's the most important thing in that segment or that lap of the race? Where does my mind need to be? And you practice that in practice, and then you get to competition, and that becomes your focus plan during your race. And it's simple stuff. It's not overly technical. It's simple keywords and phrases. And like I said, you might already have a version of this, but I would advise that you think really carefully about it and really try and distill it or simplify it into, one or two key thoughts, phrases, emotions for different segments of the race to really keep your mind where it needs to be in each part. So to get and stay focused, you need to practice a lot and do it deliberately. Quality practice above all else. You need to check in with yourself. Maybe ask yourself the question of what's important now. And then have a good focus plan during the performance so that you can choose to focus on what's important in every moment. Hi again, this is Dr. Nick Galli, mental performance coach with US Speed Skating. And in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about something called imagery. You may have heard this referred to as visualization. A lot of athletes, performers, and people will use visualization or imagery to get themselves ready to create an experience or recreate an experience so that they can feel like they've been there, and when they actually do it, it's no problem. Athletes use imagery a lot, and in sports psychology, this is a tool we use quite a bit. So if you're going to use imagery, and I advise that you do, the first tip that I would have for you is make it go beyond the sight. I know we call it visualization, but really it's about using all of your senses. And some senses matter more for certain sports than others. So of course we have our 5 basic senses here. Sight will always be important, and I would argue that sound is usually important too. So what are the sights and sounds that you associate with the experience. Taste may or may not be, smell may or may not be, and the tactile sense may or may not be. But one sense that is really important is this sixth sense. That's the proprioceptive sense. Really not just seeing and hearing what's happening, but feeling it in your body. Again, we're trying to make the imagery as close to reality as possible. Another aspect that's not really a sense, but that I advise all of my athletes to do is to really try to get themselves in the same emotional place as they might be during the real experience. So generate some anxiety, generate some excitement. Whatever it is that you might feel in that race, you need to be feeling it as much as you can during the imagery. So tip number one, use all the senses that matter. Tip number two, make sure that you're creating success. Sometimes, and it's normal, when we try and see ourselves or imagine ourselves, we, especially if it's something that we haven't done before, our mind goes toward failure or mistakes. And in some ways, that's okay. But my advice to you would be to not end that imagery session until you've gone back, hit the rewind button on your imagery, and seen yourself have some success. Maybe that means today, whatever that skill is that I'm failing at in my mind, I need to go away from that and imagine myself achieving and seeing success in something a little more simple. And then you keep building up until you are able to leave the session seeing absolute success on the skill that you'll need to be able to perform during competition. You just may need to build up to it, but don't leave your imagery on a negative note. We don't want you practicing failure in your mind. We want you practicing and seeing what it looks like to succeed in your mind. And then tip number three, and I'll have to explain this photo to you. You need to make your actual experience similar to your imagined experience. This is a lot like tip number one, but what I want to add is the setting where you do the imagery can be really important. Early on, when you're first practicing imagery or doing it for the first time, it can make a lot of sense to do it in your home or on your bed where you're relaxed and it's comfortable and you won't be disturbed. But later on, it's really nice to be able to be out in the field of play. So here we have NHL player Mike Camilleri. He's on the bench before a game. He's not in his full uniform, but he's sitting on the bench looking at the ice. He's got a stick in his hand, and you can YouTube this. He's actually, with his eyes open, going through his play in his mind, what he wants to do with the puck, where he wants to pass it, how he wants to set things up. So this is a really great add-on to enhance your imagery. If you can make your imagery setting very close to the actual performance setting, that will have an even more of an effect on your performance. So if you can be out there in your gear, standing up, going through the movements, even, if it might look silly, maybe you do it when you're on your own, that's going to help you to be able to generate the senses that you need and really make the imagery that much more powerful. So, in summary, make imagery work for you by going beyond just the visual to include all of your relevant senses, imagining success, and matching the setting in which you do your imagery as much as you can to the setting that you're imagining or creating in your mind. Hi again, this is Nick Galli, mental performance coach for US Speed Skating. And in this video, I want to talk to you about a really important skill that we call self-talk. All of us have conversations with ourselves. Unfortunately, oftentimes they tend to be conversations that aren't really helpful. I work a lot with athletes on changing these conversations so that they actually have a positive influence on their performance. 3 tips on self-talk. The first is, and you can see here, we've got sort of a process. For most of us, it's not usually the situation that influences our behavior directly, even though we tend to think that. It's usually our thought about our situation that then triggers an emotion, that then triggers a behavior. So if you're in the habit of seeing certain situations as awful, horrible, terrible, that's going to influence your emotion, which is certainly going to influence how you perform. So this can be a lot of work because we're used to thinking in these ways, but work on challenging yourself a little bit. When, for example, your warm-up's cut short and your usual thought is, oh, I can't perform under half my warm-up, how can you reinterpret that situation to change your emotion and hopefully change your behavior? So in this example, you are in control of how you interpret the situation. Don't let the situation be in control of you. Choose to interpret it in a way that's going to be helpful for you. That's tip number one. Tip number two, and I really like this one. There's a famous book called The Power of Yet. A lot of times we'll say, things to ourselves that aren't so nice, aren't really conducive to good performance. And that's okay. Those thoughts will come. And so rather than trying to always stop them or control them, we can just add to them. I can't do this yet. This doesn't work yet. I'm not good at this yet. I don't understand yet. I don't know the answer yet. There's always a yet or a but to any negative thought. And so the challenge to you is, how can you take a negative thought and finish the sentence so that you give yourself some hope? And then finally, the third tip, going along with this idea that we don't necessarily need to always control our thoughts, is to defuse them, right? So you think about defusing a bomb. So we're going to take the power away from the thoughts by noticing them for what they are. They're just words. So some people might just see those thoughts in a thought bubble and look at them and observe them rather than really taking them to heart and having to believe them. Take our negative thoughts and depower them. Look at them on a movie screen. Put them to the tune of a song. Imagine them floating down a river. Imagine them on a karaoke screen. Anything you can to decrease the power of those negative thoughts. So in summary, have better self-talk and better conversations with yourself by viewing your situations in a different way, finishing the sentence for your negative thoughts, and defusing your negative thoughts.